Imagine falling into an ocean where breathing becomes impossible. A place without sunlight, without oxygen. A place where almost nothing survives. Yet, something is moving. Somewhere beneath the sunlit waves, past the point where light gives up, there is a layer of ocean that scientists have quietly started calling one of the most hostile environments on Earth. Not because of pressure, not because of cold, but because of something far simpler and far more terrifying. The water itself refuses to let most things live in it. For decades, this zone was treated as empty, a dead layer, a place ships' sonar passed straight through without a second thought. But recently, something changed. Researchers sending cameras down into the darkness kept catching flickers of movement where nothing should exist. And that raised a question no one could ignore. If nothing can survive down there, what keeps showing up on camera? To understand what's happening in this hidden layer, you first have to understand how strange it really is. Picture the ocean not as one single body of water, but as layers stacked on top of each other, like the levels of a building no one wants to visit. Near the surface, sunlight pours in. Plants and plankton produce oxygen, and life is everywhere. But descend far enough, and that oxygen begins to vanish. Not gradually, not gently. It disappears almost entirely, across a band of ocean that can stretch for hundreds of meters. Scientists have a clinical name for it: the oxygen minimum zone. But that name barely captures what it actually feels like down there. Imagine trying to breathe on the summit of Mount Everest, where every gasp feels like it delivers nothing. Now, imagine a version of that, underwater, in complete darkness, where even the thin margin of air the mountain still offers simply doesn't exist. That is the water pressing in on anything that dares to enter this zone. And here's the unsettling part. This isn't a rare, isolated pocket. Oxygen minimum zones exist in oceans all over the planet, and in recent decades, they have been expanding. Which means scientists aren't just studying a strange curiosity. They're watching the birth of something bigger. But before we can understand what's growing, we need to understand why the oxygen disappears in the first place. At the surface, the ocean is a factory of life. Sunlight fuels microscopic plants. Those plants bloom in vast numbers, and when they die, they sink. Along with them sink the remains of everything that fed on them, a slow, constant snowfall of organic material drifting down into the dark. Scientists call it marine snow, and on the surface, it sounds almost beautiful. But beneath that beauty is a hidden cost. As all that organic material sinks, bacteria in the water rush to break it down. And just like a fire needs oxygen to burn, these bacteria need oxygen to decompose. Layer after layer, meal after meal, they consume it. Not all at once, not violently, quietly, relentlessly. Until, at a certain depth, the oxygen simply runs out faster than the ocean can replace it. It's a bit like a sealed room slowly filling with people who are all breathing the same air, with no windows, no doors, no way for fresh air to get back in. Except this room isn't small. It's an entire section of a global ocean, and that leaves us with a chilling question. What happens to a room like that when something tries to live inside it? For most animals, the answer is simple. They don't. Fish that rely on gills built for oxygen-rich water swim toward this zone and turn back, as if some ancient instinct warns them not to go further. Larger predators avoid it entirely, forming what scientists sometimes call a kind of underwater desert, a barrier of empty water that very few creatures are built to cross. It's not that the zone is toxic in a poisonous, dramatic sense. It's simpler, and in some ways, crueler than that. It's a place that slowly starves anything that needs to breathe the way most animals breathe. Metabolism drops. Movement becomes sluggish. Energy runs out faster than it can be replaced. For almost every species that has ever evolved on Earth, this zone is a dead end. Which is exactly why, for so long, researchers assumed it was empty. A void between the living ocean above and the different alien ecosystems found much deeper below. A gap in the map of life. But oceans have a habit of hiding secrets in the places we're too quick to write off. When research submersibles began exploring these depths more carefully, using low-light cameras sensitive enough to catch the faintest movement, something strange started appearing in the footage. Not schools of fish, not vibrant coral, just occasional ghostly shapes drifting through the frame, there and gone, as if the camera had caught something it wasn't supposed to. At first, researchers assumed it was debris, drifting particles, tricks of the light in a place where light barely exists at all. But the shapes kept returning, and they weren't random. They moved with intention. Something was living in the one place science had almost given up on. The first clear encounters left researchers with more questions than answers. Whatever this was, it didn't behave like a typical deep-sea predator, fast and aggressive, built for the hunt. It moved slowly, deliberately, as if it had made peace with a place that should have been unlivable. And then, caught in the beam of a submersible's light, it finally revealed itself. A dark, reddish-black form, roughly the size of a human hand. Its body draped in a webbed cloak that connected its arms like a cape. Two enormous eyes, disproportionately large for its size, seemed to absorb every scrap of light in the water. Scientists gave it a name that sounds like something out of folklore. The Vampire Squid. It's a name built for nightmares. But almost everything about that name is a little bit wrong, and that contradiction turns out to be the first clue to how strange this creature really is. Here's something most people don't expect. The vampire squid isn't actually a vampire, and it isn't actually a squid. It doesn't drink blood. It doesn't hunt. In fact, it may be one of the gentlest creatures in the entire ocean. And genetically, it doesn't fit neatly into the squid family or the octopus family either. Instead, scientists eventually placed it in its own separate order, a lone branch on the evolutionary tree, different enough from everything else alive today that it needed its own category entirely. Which raises an obvious question. If it isn't a squid and it isn't quite an octopus, what exactly is it? The truth is almost more incredible than the myth. The vampire squid appears to be the last surviving member of an ancient lineage, a creature that has been quietly drifting through Earth's oceans for longer than dinosaurs walked the land. While countless other species rose, adapted, and vanished, this strange, cloaked animal simply kept existing, tucked away in the one place most predators refuse to follow. But surviving in the oxygen minimum zone requires more than just hiding there. It requires solving a problem that should be biologically impossible. Most animals would suffocate in this water within minutes. So how does the vampire squid not only survive here, but seemingly thrive? The answer lies in a series of adaptations so specialized, they almost feel engineered. Its blood, for one, isn't red like ours. It runs a pale blue, tinted by a copper-based molecule called hemocyanin, instead of the iron-based hemoglobin found in human blood. Hemocyanin is remarkably efficient at grabbing hold of oxygen, even when there's barely any oxygen left to grab, allowing the vampire squid's blood to extract every last trace from water that would leave most animals gasping. Its metabolism tells a similar story. Where most predators burn through energy chasing prey, the vampire squid has essentially opted out of the chase entirely. It drifts. It conserves. It moves only when it needs to, using minimal energy in a place where energy is the most valuable resource of all. But biology alone doesn't fully explain what scientists were seeing. There was still something almost otherworldly about the way this creature navigated total darkness with such calm precision. And that mystery leads straight to its eyes. Relative to its body, the vampire squid has the largest eyes of any animal on Earth. In a creature roughly the size of a football, its eyes can measure nearly an inch across. Two glowing spheres built to capture whatever fragments of light manage to survive that far down. In a world without sunlight, without color, without any visual reference at all, those eyes may be the closest thing to a lifeline this creature has. Scientists studying its vision believe those eyes are tuned less for detail and more for detecting motion. A shift in the dark. A ripple. Anything that suggests danger or opportunity, which makes sense when you consider what the vampire squid does when danger actually arrives. Because it turns out this creature has no ink to hide behind, no speed to outrun a predator, and yet it's almost never caught. Most squid and octopuses share a famous defense. When threatened, they release a cloud of ink and vanish behind it. The vampire squid can't do that. Deep in the oxygen minimum zone, producing ink would cost precious energy it can't easily spare. And in near total darkness, a cloud of ink would be nearly useless anyway. So evolution gave it something else instead. Something almost theatrical. When threatened, the vampire squid draws its webbed arms up and over its own body, turning itself inside out like an umbrella caught in the wind. Rows of soft, fleshy spines, once thought to be a defensive weapon, are revealed along the underside of its arms, transforming a soft, vulnerable creature into something spiked and unfamiliar, a shape predators simply don't expect. Scientists call this the pineapple posture, and it may be one of the strangest defense mechanisms ever documented in the animal kingdom. But that wasn't even its strangest adaptation. Because if the vampire squid can't outrun danger, and its ink is useless in the deep, it has one more trick left, and this one glows. Scattered across its body are light-producing organs called photophores, capable of generating soft, glowing pulses of blue-white light. Unlike many bioluminescent creatures that flash brightly to startle predators, the vampire squid uses its light with restraint, small bursts, sudden flickers, brief glowing clouds released from the tips of its arms, designed to confuse and disorient rather than blind. In a world without sunlight, it has learned to make its own. And light isn't the only unexpected talent hidden inside this animal, because for years, one basic question about the vampire squid went unanswered. In a zone this hostile, this starved of energy, what does it actually eat? Unlike almost every other cephalopod, the vampire squid isn't a hunter. It doesn't chase prey. It doesn't ambush anything. Instead, it survives on what drifts down from above, that same marine snow responsible for stealing the oxygen out of the water in the first place. Using two thin, retractable filaments far longer than its own body, it collects these falling particles, coats them in sticky mucus, and draws them in as food. It's a strange kind of poetry when you think about it. The very substance that helped create this lethal, oxygen-starved zone is the same substance quietly feeding the one creature clever enough to live there. By now, scientists studying the vampire squid had uncovered blue blood, giant eyes, glowing defenses, and an entirely unique way of feeding. And yet, the deepest mystery wasn't about how it survives. It was about how long it's been surviving at all. Fossil evidence suggests that creatures closely resembling the vampire squid have existed for over 300 million years, drifting through oceans long before the first dinosaurs ever took a breath, let alone the ancestors of anything walking the earth today. Empires of life have risen and collapsed since then. Mass extinctions have wiped out the vast majority of species that ever existed. And through nearly all of it, this quiet, drifting creature in its impossible zone simply endured. Not by being the strongest, not by being the fastest, but by finding a place so hostile, so overlooked, that almost nothing else wanted it. Which brings us to why scientists are still watching this creature so closely today. The oxygen minimum zones scattered across the world's oceans aren't staying the same size. As ocean temperatures shift, these low oxygen layers have been slowly expanding, creeping upward and outward into regions that once supported far more life. For most species, that's a warning sign. But for researchers studying the vampire squid, it's something else entirely. A rare opportunity to understand how life adapts when survival becomes almost impossible. By studying its blood chemistry, its slow metabolism, its unusual defenses, scientists are beginning to understand the outer limits of what animal life can actually endure. And in a changing ocean, that knowledge might matter more than anyone expected. Because here's the deeper truth hiding inside this story. The vampire squid isn't just a strange, ancient survivor tucked away in the dark. It's a living reminder that resilience doesn't always look like strength. Sometimes it looks like patience, like restraint, like finding a way to slow down completely in a world that punishes anything moving too fast. For most of history, humans assumed the deep, oxygen-starved ocean was empty simply because we hadn't looked closely enough. And maybe that's the real lesson drifting up from the darkness. That the quietest places on Earth, the ones we're quickest to write off as lifeless, are sometimes hiding stories more ancient, more resilient, and more astonishing than anything happening in the light. Somewhere down there, right now, in water that should make survival impossible, a small glowing blue-blooded creature is still drifting through the dark. Exactly as it has for hundreds of millions of years, waiting patiently for us to keep paying attention.